The Lotus-Eaters. Not every danger wears the face of a monster. Some lurk in caves, hidden beneath the sea or high upon lonely mountains. Others come armed with claws, teeth, or impossible strength. But some dangers arrive with a smile. They offer comfort instead of violence, peace instead of fear. And by the time you realize what they have taken from you, it is already too late. After 10 long years of war, the city of Troy had finally fallen. The Greek kings gathered their armies, raised their sails, and began the long awaited voyage home. Among them was Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca. He dreamed of seeing his wife Penelope once again. He longed to embrace the son he had left as an infant nearly 20 years before. Every sunrise carried the promise that home lay somewhere beyond the horizon. But the gods had other plans. Not long after leaving Troy, Odysseus and his fleet stopped at the land of the Cicones, where a hard-fought victory turned into disaster when his men lingered too long, blinded by greed. Many lives were lost before the survivors escaped back to their ships. No sooner had they returned to sea than another trial awaited them. The violent storm descended without warning. The winds howled across the waves, rain lashed the decks. Towering walls of water scattered the fleet and drove the ships farther and farther from every familiar landmark. For 9 endless days they drifted across an empty sea. The sailors no longer knew where they were. The stars offered no comfort. The shoreline had vanished. Even Odysseus, whose mind was famous for finding answers where none seemed to exist, could only wait and trust the storm would eventually release them. At last, on the 10th morning, the winds fell silent. The sea became as smooth as polished glass. Ahead lay an island unlike any they had seen before. Gentle hills rolled toward the shore, flowers covered the fields, trees bent beneath the weight of ripe fruit. Everything about the island seemed peaceful. There were no fortress or walls, no soldiers waiting with drawn spears, no smoke from burning villages. Only silence. The exhausted sailors breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps at last the gods had shown mercy. As was his custom, whenever they reached an unfamiliar land, Odysseus chose a small group of trusted companions to explore while the rest remained with the ships. Go peacefully, he told them. Learn who lives here and whether they welcome strangers. Return before sunset. The men nodded and disappeared inland. For a time, all was quiet. Then they encountered the island's inhabitants. The people greeted them warmly. There were no questions, no suspicions, no demands to know where they had come from. Instead, the strangers smiled and offered them a simple gift, a strange fruit taken from the lotus plant. Its fragrance was unlike any the sailors had ever known. Sweet, soft, almost impossible to resist. Believing it to be an ordinary act of hospitality, they accepted. The fruit melted on their tongues. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, little by little, something began to change. The endless years of war seemed strangely distant. The faces of fallen friends faded from memory. The fear of the storm no longer mattered. Even thoughts of Ithaca began to slip quietly away. The longing that had carried them across the sea simply disappeared. There was no pain, no grief, no homesickness, only perfect contentment. Why struggle against the sea? Why chase a home that existed only as a fading memory? Here, the sun was warm, the fields were beautiful, the people were kind. Surely this was enough. The sailors laughed with their new companions. They wandered the peaceful fields without a care in the world. The hours drifted by unnoticed. Back at the shore, the sun climbed steadily higher. Odysseus watched the path leading inland. His companions should have returned long ago. As afternoon turned toward evening, concern replaced patience. Gathering several more men, he followed the same trail into the island's interior. What he found puzzled him. His companions were sitting peacefully among the Lotus-Eaters. They smiled as though nothing in the world could trouble them. There was no sign that they had been captured, no wounds, no chains, no cries for help. Odysseus called their names. They looked at him with pleasant curiosity, as though he were a stranger. "It's time to leave," he said. "We sail for Ithaca." One of the men frowned. Ithaca? The word sounded familiar. Another smiled gently. "Why would we leave? We have everything we need." Odysseus stared in disbelief. "What of your families?" No answer. "Your homes?" Only puzzled expressions. "The years we spent fighting at Troy?" Nothing. It was as though those memories had never existed. Then Odysseus understood. The island did not imprison the body, it imprisoned the will. No walls were needed, no weapons. The lotus stole something far more precious than memory. It stole purpose. Without another word, Odysseus ordered his men to seize the enchanted sailors. They resisted, not with anger, not with violence, but with desperate pleading. "Please, don't make us leave. We're happy here. There is nothing waiting for us beyond the sea." The words struck Odysseus harder than any spear. He knew they were not speaking freely. The lotus had stolen the very thing that made them who they are. Ignoring their cries, he and his companions carried them back toward the ships. Some struggled, some wept, others simply begged to be released. The journey back to shore felt longer than the one inland. Once aboard, Odysseus gave another order: tie them securely beneath the rowing benches. No matter how loudly they protested, no matter how fiercely they begged, no one else was to set foot upon the island. The anchors were raised, the sails caught the wind. Slowly, the island began to disappear beyond the horizon. Only when it had vanished from sight did Odysseus allow his companions to be untied. As the hours passed and the sea carried them farther away, the spell began to weaken. Memories returned like the first rays of dawn after a long night. The sailors remembered Troy, their fallen friends, their families, their homes, and with those memories came sorrow. The happiness the lotus had given them had not been real. It had merely hidden everything that gave life its meaning. Odysseus looked back toward the empty horizon where the island had once stood. He understood that they had escaped one of the greatest dangers they would ever face, not because it threatened their lives, but because it tempted them to abandon them. There would be greater monsters ahead: a one-eyed giant, a powerful sorceress, a haunting song of the sirens, even the journey of the land of the dead. Yet none of those trials offered the same quiet temptation as the lotus. For sometimes the greatest danger is not hatred, but forgetting what you love. So the ship sailed onward across the wine dark sea, toward trials yet unknown, toward home. Because as long as Odysseus could remember Ithaca, he would never stop searching for it.